That mention of the first cause yesterday should have given me deja vu for Glastonbury Romance, but it didn't until today when I saw it again. Well, I did. It sounded familiar yesterday, but it's like, where have I heard that before? And that's the argument that was in a Glastonbury Romance. Anyway, we're back to, I think it's Langton's memoirs of memories of Johnson's bon mots. Kind of basically Boswell is slacking off here for a good many 100 pages. I don't know how many pages, maybe 20 pages. Depend upon it, said Johnson, that if a man talks of his misfortune, there is something in them that is not disagreeable to him. For where there is nothing but pure misery, there never is any recourse to the mention of it. He's told Boswell that himself, actually, in the letter, I think. So sometimes Johnson, plays on his best of records, I guess, when he's talking to people. Rehashes. A man must be a poor beast that should read no more in quantity than he could utter aloud. Imlock in Rasselas I spelt with a C at the end because it is less like English, which should always have the Saxon K added to the C, like Spock, I guess. Many a man is mad in certain instances and goes through life without having it perceived. For example, a madness has seized a person of supposing himself obliged literally to pray continually. Had the madness turned the opposite way and the person thought it a crime ever to pray, it might not improbably have continued unobserved. Johnson apprehended that the delineation of characters in the end of the first book of the Retreat of the 10,000 was the first instance of the kind that was known. Boswell says here, I hope the authority of the great master of our language will stop that curtailing innovation by which we see critic, public, etc., frequently written instead of critic, public, etc. And here he's spelling critic and public with a CK at the end. Oh, so that was a footnote that went before, obviously, when I made my Spock comment. This footnote is for Xenophon's Anabasis, is what the Retreat of the 10,000 is. So that's a little confusing, but I don't think it really matters, so I'm going to continue on without clearing it up anymore, which will probably just confuse matters. Supposing, said Johnson, a wife to be of a studious or argumentative turn, it would be very troublesome. For instance, if a woman should continually dwell upon the subject of the Arian heresy. Lost to me. Inside joke. No man speaks concerning another, even supposed it be in his praise, if he thinks he does not hear him exactly as he would if he thought he was within hearing. The applause of a single human being is of great consequence. This he said to me with a great earnestness of manner, very near the time of his decease, on occasion of having desired me to read a letter addressed to him from some person in the north of England. Which, when I had done, and he asked me what the contents were, as I thought being particular upon might fatigue him, it being of great length, I only told him in general that it was highly in his praise, and then he expressed himself as above. Spoiler alert there, and Johnson does indeed die at the end of this biography. Johnson mentioned with an air of satisfaction what Baretti had told him, that meeting in the course of his studying English was an excellent paper in the Spectator, one of 4 that were written by the respectable dissenting minister, Mr. Grove of Taunton, in observing the genius and energy of mind that it exhibits, greatly quickened his curiosity to visit our country. As he thought such were the lighter periodical essays of our authors, their productions on more weighty occasions must be wonderful indeed. Johnson observed once at Sir Joshua Reynolds's that a beggar in the street will more readily ask alms from a man, though there should be no mark of wealth on his appearance, than from even a well-dressed woman. which he accounted for from the greater degree of carefulness as to money that is to be found in women, saying farther upon it that the opportunities in general that they possess of improving their condition are much fewer than men have, and adding as he looked round the company, which consists of men only, there is not one of us who does not think he might be richer if he would use his endeavor. Footnote here from Boswell. Stern is of a direct contrary opinion. See his Sentimental Journey article, The Mystery. Johnson thus characterized an ingenious writer, he'll suggest Joseph Warden here, of his acquaintance, "Sir, he is an enthusiast by rule. He may hold up that shield against all his enemies," was an observation on Homer, in reference to his description of the shield of Achilles, made by Mrs. Fitzherbert, wife to his friend Mr. Fitzherbert of Derbyshire, and respected by Dr. Johnson as a very fine one. He had in general a very high opinion of that lady's understanding. An observation of Bathurst may be mentioned, which Johnson repeated, appearing to acknowledge it to be well-founded. Namely, it was somewhat remarkable how seldom on occasion of coming into the company of any new person one felt any wish of inclination or an inclination to see him again. Okay. Kind of rude. This year, the Reverend Dr. Oh, wait, are we done? Oh, okay. I think that was the end of I believe that was Langton's memoirs of Johnson. Kind of ended on a funny note. It kind of just ends with like, yeah, you don't want to see, you meet new people, you don't want to see them again. That's Langton's final word on Johnson. Go figure. So now we're back to Boswell talking. I believe. I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything. Yeah. This year, the Reverend Dr. Franklin, having published a translation of Lucian, inscribed to him the Demonaw thus: "To Dr. Samuel Johnson, the Demonaw of the present age, this piece is inscribed by a sincere admirer of his respectable talents, signed the translator." Though upon a particular comparison of Demonax, or Demonax, and Johnson, there does not seem to be a great deal of similarity between them. This dedication is a just compliment from the general character given by Lucian of the ancient sage, some Greek here, the best philosopher whom I have ever seen or known. And now we're up to 1781. Oh, geez, it's going to be... It won't be long before poor Johnson's dead. But this year he's going to turn 72. In 1781, and maybe Boswell will see him this year. In 1781, Johnson at last completed his Life of the Poets, of which he gives this account. This is from his Prayers and Meditations. "Sometime in March I finished the Lives of the Poets, which I wrote in my usual way, dilaterally and hastily, and willing to work, and working with vigor and haste." In a memorandum previous to this, he says of them, "Written, I hope, in such a manner as may tend to the promotion of piety." His design is thus announced in his advertisement. "The booksellers having determined to publish a book of English poetry, I was persuaded to promise them a preface to the works of each author, an undertaking, as it was then presented to my mind, not very tedious or difficult. My purpose was only to have allotted to every poet an advertisement like that or those, which we find in the French miscellanies, containing a few dates and a general character. But I have been led beyond my intention, I hope by the honest desire of giving useful pleasure." This is the work which of all Dr. Johnson's writings will perhaps be read most generally and with most pleasure. Philology and biography were his favorite pursuits, and those who lived most in intimacy with him heard him, upon all occasions when there was a proper opportunity, take delight in expatiating upon the various merits of the English poets, upon the niceties of their characters, and the events of their progress through the world which they contributed to illuminate. His mind was so full of that kind of information, and it was so well arranged in his memory, that in performing what he had undertaken in this way, he had little more to do than to put his thoughts upon paper, exhibiting first each poet's life, and then subjoining a critical examination of his genius and works. But when he began to write, the subject swelled in such a manner that instead of prefaces to each poet, no more than a few pages as he had originally intended, he produced an ample, rich, and most entertaining view of them in every respect. In this he resembled Quintilian, who tells us that in the composition of his institutions of oratory, laetus se tempum praeste materia plusquam imponebrar honoris sponte suscepti, or, but as my manner grew under my hand, I voluntarily undertook a bigger task than had been laid upon me. The booksellers, justly sensible of the great additional value of the copyright, presented him with another £100 over and above 200, for which his agreement was to furnish such prefaces as he thought fit. This was, however, but a small recompense for such a collection of biography and such principles and illustrations of criticism as, if digested and arranged in one system by some modern Aristotle or Longinus, might form a code upon that subject, such as no other nation can show. As he was so good as to make me a present of the greatest part of the original, and indeed only manuscript of this admirable work, I have an opportunity of observing with wonder the correctness with which he rapidly struck off such glowing composition. He may be assimilated to the Lady of Waller, who could impress with love at first sight, some other nymphs with color faint, in pencil slow may Cupid paint, in a weak heart in time destroy, she has a stamp and prints the boy. That he, however, had a good deal of trouble and some anxiety in carrying on the work, we see from a series of letters to Mr. Nichols the printer, whose variety of literary inquiry and obliging disposition rendered him very useful to Johnson. Footnote here. Thus, in the life of Waller, Mr. Nichols will find a reference to the parliamentary history, from which a long quotation is to be inserted. Mr. Nichols cannot easily find the book. The Master Johnson will send it from Strahan. That's an example of a letter to Mr. Nichols from Mr. Nichols, the printer, from Johnson, I'm assuming. And then it says, oh, and there's some other examples here. Oh, there's a whole bunch of pages of them. Okay, I gotta situate myself here. What do I want to do? Let me finish this paragraph, and then I'll go back to that footnote. Mr. Stevens, who is this now? I don't know. Mr. Stevens appears, from the papers in my possession, to have supplied him with some anecdotes and quotations, and I observe the fair hand of Mrs. Thrale as one of his copyists of select passages. So Boswell is just mentioning who helped Johnson with his Life of the Poets. But Johnson was principally indebted to my steady friend, Mr. Isaac Reed of Staple Inn, whose extensive and accurate knowledge of English literary history I do not express with exaggeration when I say it is wonderful. Indeed, his labors have proved it to the world, and all who have the pleasure of his acquaintance can bear testimony to the frankness of his communication in private society. It is not my intention to dwell upon each of Johnson's Lives of the Poets, or attempt an analysis of their merits, which, were I able to do it, would take up too much room in this work. Yet I shall make a few observations upon some of them, and insert a few various readings. So I'm going to pause now and go back to that footnote, which is, I believe, let me just make sure I'm correct about this. I'll read the sentence before the footnote so we're clear on this. That Johnson, however, had a good deal of trouble and some anxiety in carrying on the work we see from a series of letters to Mr. Nichols, the printer. And now here's some of the letters. I'm going to read the first one again. In the life of Waller, Mr. Nichols will find reference to the parliamentary history from which a long quotation is to be inserted. Mr. Nichols cannot easily find the book. Mr. Johnson will send it from Strahan. Then there's another one. Clarendon is here returned. Then another one. By some accident, I laid your note upon Duke up so safely that I cannot find it. Your information has been of great use to me. I must beg it again, with another list of our authors, for I have last laid that with the other. I have sent Stephenie's epitaph. Let me have the revises as soon as can be. December 1778. I have sent Phillips with his epitaphs to be inserted. The fragments of a thing. The fragments of a preface is hardly worth the impression, but that we may seem to do something. It may be added to the life of Phillips. The Latin page is to be added to the life of Smith. I shall be at home to revise the 2 sheets of Milton, March 1st, 1779. Another one. Please to get me the last edition of Hugh's letters, and try to get Dennis upon Blackmore, and upon Cato, and anything of the same writer against Pope. Our materials are defective. And another one. As Waller professed to have imitated Fairfax, do you think a few pages of Fairfax would enrich our edition? Few readers have seen it, and it may please them, but it is not necessary. And another one. An account of the lives and works of some of the most eminent English poets by etc. And the English poets biographically and critically considered by Sam Johnson. Let Mr. Nichols take his choice or make another in his mind, May 1781. And another one. You somehow forget the advertisement for the new edition. It was not enclosed. Of Gay's letters, I see not that any use can be made, for they give no information of anything. That he was a member of the Philosophical Society is something, but surely he could be but a corresponding member. However, not having his life here, I know not how to put it in, and it is of little importance. Now a note from Boswell. See several more in the Gentleman's Magazine, 1785. The editor of that miscellany, in which Johnson wrote for several years, seems justly to think that every fragment of so great a man is worthy of being preserved. I thought that was kind of interesting. So he was Mr. Nichols was not only the printer, but he was sort of the secretary and editor of Johnson. Anyway, back to the lives of the poets and Boswell's life of Johnson. The life of Crowley, Johnson himself considered as the best of the whole, on account of the dissertation which it contains on the metaphysical poets. Dryden, whose critical abilities were equal to his poetical, had mentioned them in his excellent dedication of his Juvenal, but had barely mentioned them. Johnson has exhibited them at large with such happy illustration from their writings, and in so luminous a manner, that indeed he may be allowed the full merit of novelty, and to have discovered to us, as it were, a new planet in the poetical hemisphere. It is remarkable by Johnson in considering the works of a poet, such as Life of Sheffield, paragraph 25, that's what the footnote's telling me, that amendments are seldom made without some token of a rent, but I do not find that this is applicable to prose. See, however, there's a footnote here from an editor of this book. See, however, page 1072 of this volume, where the same remark is made in Johnson as they are speaking of prose. Now, all very confusing. We're just going to ignore this. We shall see that though his amendments, Johnson's amendments in this work, are for the better, there is nothing of the panis asustus, perpetuus annus et alter assentus panis. A purple patch or two is tacked on from Horace. The texture is uniform, and indeed, what had been there at first is very seldom unfit to have remained. Now we have various readings. The original reading is enclosed in crotchets, Crotchets, and if you're supposed to pronounce it, I'm pronouncing it crotches, crotchets. And the present one is printed in italics. So here we have the original reading is in. So this is something he took out. So it says all. Well, this is tough for me to read, but I'll try. All future votaries of that may hereafter pant for solitude, to conceive and execute the agitation of perception, pains and the pleasures of other minds, the wide effulgence of the blazing a summer noon. Okay, so here, in the first one, the original was all future votaries of solitude, and that was changed to all that may hereafter pant for solitude. And then to conceive and execute the agitation of perception of other minds was changed to conceive and execute the pains and the pleasures of other minds. And then the wild effulgence of the blazing noon was changed to the wild effulgence of a summer noon. So those are pretty good improvements. I guess we're moving on to the life of Waller, so I'll stop for now. Till next time, bye from Boswell.